Welcome to the Check Your Head podcast, the podcast where notable musicians and experts come and share their stories and solutions for mental health and wellness. I'm your host, Mari Fong, a music journalist and life coach for musicians, and today I'm excited to have an up-and-coming musical artist, Jordan Benjamin, also known as Grandson, on the Check Your Head podcast. Grandson's debut album, Death of an Optimist, dropped in December of 2020. And when I first saw Grandson's music video for his single Dirty, it was definitely a wow moment. This song was a mixture of rock, electronic, a bit of hip-hop, with melodies I could sing and dance to. And then when I heard Grandson's entire album, not only did the songs blow me away, but the lyrics jumped out at me as well, because Grandson is not only a musician, but he's also an activist, singing about social justice, bringing light to topics like mental health and gun control, all with the hopes for positive change. So when Grandson's single Dirty rose to the top 10 on Billboard's alternative rock charts this month, I wasn't surprised, and I can't wait to see his live show, because if his live show is anything like his music videos, I know Grandson's show will definitely go off. So for our interview, Grandson shares his story of mood disorders and what he does to soothe his soul and tame his sometimes impulsive behaviors and emotions. He also talks about his charity, XX Resistance Fund, and how his fans, that he calls his grandkids, can also participate in positive societal change. After that, Kat Jensen and I will talk about Grandson's interview, focusing on what to do when we feel overwhelmed with life, what it means to catastrophize, and the uses and benefits of CBD oil for mood disorders and more. And we'll end the episode with a clip of one of my favorite Grandson songs off the new album called In Over My Head. So let's start by hearing Jordan Benjamin, aka Grandson, share his story. Today we have Jordan Benjamin, who is Grandson.
That's me.
Yes, and I am excited because Grandson is not only a great musical artist, but he's also an activist. And I feel like with your music, with your videos, and especially with your debut album, Death of an Optimist, it's really a great example of that. You talk about so many different issues, some of them being political, some of them being, just human issues like mental health and drug addiction. But I wanted to start off because, we are in the middle of this pandemic, and your album is so current about what's happening today, which is another thing that I love about it. But with the chaos of 2020 and the lockdown, how has your mental health been during this time?
It's really hard. I pride myself on being pretty pragmatic. I often associate my mental health with a sense of productivity. If I feel that I'm being productive, I feel better. It feels like a better day. And it's hard sometimes to feel productive when you really don't know what part of the pandemic you're in, when it's tough to decide how much should I be building towards finding sustainable routine within the pandemic, or continue to treat this like it is this weird purgatory that we're merely passing through, and be putting a ton of my emotional investment into getting out to the other side of this pandemic. Mm-hmm. If somebody came to me and told me, look, you got 100 days. You got 100 days, you got to sit inside, you got to wear a mask, and then you're out. I would be springing into action. I would, this is what I'm going to do for my 100 days, especially now with the expectation of this constantly available presence on social media. Here's my 100-day vlog. Let me just keep working towards this countdown. But the uncertainty of the pandemic definitely makes staying on top of your mental health hard. So it's a long answer, but it's a complicated question. I think I, like a lot of people, just go through waves of feeling on top of it, and then days where it's really, really hard to envision the other side of it. But as I'm sure will come up throughout this conversation, I apply that pragmatism and that sense of productivity to my mental health. I'm pretty disciplined about putting together a regimen of things that are going to make me feel a little bit better. And usually when I'm going through a low patch or like a manic episode, I can usually trace back. There's something in my toolkit that is being neglected, whether that's nature, whether that's writing in my journal. There's things that I do for my mental health. And so I just lean on my toolkit really hard in this time. And when I stay on top of it, I'm feeling good. And then other days it's all uphill.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one thing that you said that is really key is uncertainty. There's been a lot of that in 2020, a lot of ups and downs. But, I tapped into something that you said, which is manic. And oftentimes sometimes when people refer to manic periods and depressive periods, it could be like a sign of maybe bipolar, or it could just be, like ebbs and waves and tides of emotion. How would you describe that for yourself?
I don't think anybody could be faulted for feeling up and down in this time. It's certainly hard to untangle what is a product of this complicated time we're living in, and then what is something that's inherent within you. I come from a family where bipolar disorder and personality disorders, there is like examples of that within my family, within my extended family, cousins and on my father's side. So it's something that has never been diagnosed. When I was a kid, I was we did a test for having ADD and like a mild bipolar disorder, and a lot of the kind of questionnaire, the bells went off, but mostly I was doing those tests to just get out of a course that I needed to drop so that my GPA wouldn't plummet when I was in college. I never really took it that seriously until later on in my life, when I was able to be more honest about my relationship to smoking pot and the things that I had built up as coping mechanisms. And it was certainly no hardship of mine to wake up and be high before even 9-10 in the morning, but it was much more complicated when I was trying to really get to the bottom of what is it. It's like sometimes you go through the motions. I'm watching myself put on my shoes. I'm watching myself get running, and I don't even know what I'm running to or running from. It's easy to get caught in those cycles, and my 20s have really been defined by getting to know myself a bit better, and it's really a unique opportunity being a musician, being on tour, having experienced a little bit of success, thankfully, in my desired field. It's an incredibly enabling environment, and it gives me a playground with which to really navigate these different sides of my personality, my ego. Mm-hmm. So there are parts of the ups and downs that I navigate that are in my nature, and other parts that have been nurtured in over the last year and over my lifetime.
I've gone through my own ups and downs and struggles, and I do think that mental health is a journey. It's like we start to learn more about ourselves and as time goes on. And I'm glad you brought up family history, because oftentimes things like ADHD or bipolar or depression are passed down through families. And it gives us more insight, I guess, on what we could do with ourselves and, with our future. I mean, how have you been able to kind of deal with those things? I mean, a lot of people have different kinds of solutions. I mean, what has worked for you?
Yeah, I feel very, very lucky that I come from a family and I'm living in a time where these things aren't met with the ridicule or with the skepticism that they have traditionally been met with, especially in men and traditional views on masculinity. I didn't really grow up with a ton of that. As early as 13, 14 years old, my parents were sitting me down and trying to help me understand my aggressive tendencies or my impulses to act out. And very early on, around that time in high school, I was getting into just kind of like juvenile problems of just acting out in class. I got caught shoplifting one time, with the money to buy this thing in my pocket. I just walked out with it and got caught. And it was a really important opportunity for me to really reflect on, well, what was it that I was trying to communicate to people? And very early on, my parents introduced writing to me. I had naturally leaned towards creative writing my whole life, but the practice of journaling, finding the language with which you talk to yourself, seeing your thoughts reflected back at you on the page, it's very sobering. I would write in these almost drunk, like very impulsive, with a lot of hyperbole and self-deprecation, and I would read it later and have this primary source footage that became increasingly valuable to me as I would reflect back on these times in my life that were really up and down. And so journaling was something that I picked up at an early age. Smoking pot was something that I have been doing since I was like 12, 13 years old, and has been at times helpful and at times a detriment to my mental health. That one's a complicated one that I don't actually think is a one-size-fit-all. I don't think people should be spending their life in prison over it, but I do think that it can exacerbate certain predispositions people might have towards things like mania, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. So for me, it was finding creativity, finding these outlets, and then spending a little bit of time in quiet. It's easy. I've been a city kid my whole life. I grew up right by the train tracks and always lived in cities my whole life. And it was only when my older sisters started introducing me to nature, and not just, going for a walk around the block, but getting out for a couple of days, doing some camping. And I know that nature can be kind of inaccessible, particularly for people of color. It's very much dominated by, white males, but I really do find getting out into national parks, getting to sit with your thoughts, spend some time in silence, that really helped. And then over the past year, finally being able to sit still and meditate, and I've been using Headspace for a year. It was excruciating at first to anybody listening who goes, oh, no, that's not me. I couldn't do that. Like, I could not sit still for a second, and spent most of the first couple of sessions just like waiting for him to tell me I could finally get up and go. But, slowly but surely, if you sit there long enough in timeout, you can maybe get a little bit of silence. And so that's been how I've been starting my days. And, I think like a lot of things, you can develop the world's best game plan and then wake up one day and none of this shit is working, and then you got to just refocus. Or sometimes the best thing I can do for my day is stop trying to fix it and just embrace feeling like shit that day or whatever it is, and, cancel your plans and sit there and feel sorry for yourself. Sometimes that is what you need. And I think that we operate right now, there is this desire for instant gratification that I have to battle, because it is such a journey, as you were saying, mental health. You're stuck with yourself. Like, you're going to bed with this forever. So you better learn how to make peace with it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that we can't escape it because it's in our head. And sometimes we're trying to figure out what is actually going on. And sometimes, our thoughts or our behaviors can frighten even ourselves, right? We're trying to understand it ourselves. First of all, I applaud you for doing the meditation, because, you just described having some ADHD tendencies, which already is, it's tough to sit still sometimes. But what did you get from meditation? What is it that you received from that?
Well, I think that number one, particularly when I do it at the beginning of the day, doing guided meditations helps me a lot as far as intention setting and being deliberate with my time, recognizing how much time I spend anxious about the future, anxious about the past, thinking of past relationships, things I went through I would have done differently. Those arguments you have with yourself in the shower or something, or right before bed. I spent a lot of time and spend a lot of time living either in the past or the future. And when you recognize just how ephemeral this present moment is, and that it's just constantly living and dying, and looking at old pictures of yourself, looking at old, relationships that felt so real and consequential at the time that now it's just water under the bridge. With me, I think comes a little more humility, and I can be a little easier on myself and others. One thing that Headspace really helped me with, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything, by the way. I'm not getting any money for this. I'll take it, but honestly, no, this has just really been something that helps. They also help me frame your practice of thoughtfulness, setting your intentions, being grounded, not just for your own personal benefits, but think critically about how your mental health is affecting your relationships. And if not for you, reflect on how being a little more patient, being a little more grounded, being a little more grateful, how those things can impact the day of the people that you're spending your time with, whether that's your partner, your family, your roommates, whatever that may be. And typically for me, that's accompanied with this sense, like this feeling that I can really fuck it up, that I have a ton of consequence, that my actions can really impact other people. And in the times where I am reminded of how small I am, and that maybe the world isn't revolving around me, that's actually comes with a certain deal of relief for me personally. So that's how it affects me. And I know other people it's different. And again, most days I sit there and maybe I get 30 seconds of stillness in a 10-minute practice. Still, even just sitting there, it helps a lot. My mother and I suffer from, I have a hard time sleeping. I'm a super light sleeper, and it's really hard for me to fall asleep some nights. And I remember being a kid and the anxiety. I would be doing the math in my head. Well, if I go to bed now, I'll get 6 hours of sleep. Oh God, I'm supposed to get 8. I'm going to be so upset tomorrow. Oh, if only I could go to sleep. Look, now it's 5.5 hours. Oh, and my body would tense up, and I would be so anxious about living that next day. And I remember as a kid, it's something that stuck with me. One day I just recognized, you know what? I'm going to be tired tomorrow, and I'll probably get a nap in or not, but it's certainly not doing me any good sitting here, all anxious about it. My mind is clearly racing. So what do you want to talk about? What are you thinking about? And I started thinking about my music, production, things that were keeping me up, relationships in my life that were giving me a hard time. In accepting your nature and in accepting that desire to spin your wheels sometimes, you can actually get certain revelations that can be quite helpful. And in meditation, in sitting still, I'm forced to confront some of those things that are keeping me up at night.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Sometimes that acceptance does calm your mind. And that app, Headspace, is actually on our website, which is checkyourheadpodcast.com, because we have apps and telehealth and all kinds of things that you can use, as part of solutions. In 2017, we lost 3 musicians to suicide. Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, and EDM DJ Avicii. And the thing is with your music, you have rock, you have electronic, you have hip hop in there. And I'm sure like these artists, when you heard the news, what kind of reaction do you remember having after hearing that news?
Oh man. Yeah, like anybody, like obviously Chris Cornell, Chester, super, super influential on me. And I remember even celebrity deaths like Robin Williams, even Kobe Bryant, where it wasn't necessarily deliberate, but yet there felt like there was this great cosmic unfairness. It really destabilizes your sense of, our relationship to finding purpose in life, and the good guy wins and the bad guy gets his comeuppance. Those things are so fragile. And when that social contract feels violated, when somebody who you think has it all makes that ultimate gesture, statement about their life or their mental health, it is really hard to reconcile. And you're wondering, well, then what am I doing? What am I working so hard for? I think like a lot of people, it was just like one of those like kind of nauseous moments to just stop and reflect. And it sucks. I've been fortunate enough to be welcomed into the Linkin Park community, both through my collaborations with Chester's bandmate Mike Shinoda for the 20th anniversary of their album Hybrid Theory. I put out a cover that Linkin Park reposted. I've had a ton of love from the Linkin Park community, and we're talking about 1 million strong people still reeling. And I don't know where they were in that moment for Chester, but for anybody that struggles with those fantasies or thinks about committing suicide, it's just, you leave behind a hole that people spend their whole life unable to fill. Just looking at how many people's have just been wrecked by and trying to make sense of a thing that is inherently impossible to make sense of. It's tough, and I really feel for anybody who's been affected, for sure, both whether it's a friend or in these celebrity relationships. We feel like we know these people, these parasocial relationships we develop with our favorite celebrities, and when something bad happens to them, you feel like you've lost a friend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is the reason why I started the Check Your Head podcast, was because of those deaths. That these musicians brought me so much joy. How can they leave this life in so much pain? And the other thing, you mentioned, about ADHD, is that sometimes it's reactive and sometimes it could have depression components. And so if you can imagine being in a depression and then also having that reactive component to maybe something that happened to you and you act on it, on this reaction, it's just having to practice to sit with yourself, right, until the moment passes, and not making any rash decisions, that can be final.
Yeah, and I think we have a particular fascination with celebrities who are gone too soon. We often deify them, we glorify them, and we give them the flowers that we didn't give them when we were alive. And I think for a lot of people, there's something strangely attractive about that. There are times where in the past I've fantasized about how if I were to do something like that, how would I be viewed in this community? Would the impact I make be somehow greater if I were to leave at the height of my career instead of living too long? But those fantasies are really important to make sense of and to voice out loud and be reminded that you can do anything in this world. You just can't do nothing. I like reminding fans of that when people bring up their mental health, and there is nothing in this world that is irreversible. If you are in an environment, in a household, in a community where you don't feel accepted, your people are out there. There is a big world, and there is a whole lot of love waiting for you. But certain things you can't undo, and it's important to make sense of that and be vocal about it. And, I've been very fortunate to work with a therapist for basically ever since my career began. And I understand and recognize that that's a privilege many either can't or don't prioritize. And making sense with those things, speaking them out loud, and feeling understood in those moments, that really helped.
Is there a certain kind of therapy that you use, and also what are the benefits for you, as far as therapy goes?
Sure. I work with a psychotherapist. We spend a lot of time tracing patterns, exploring subconscious impulses. Sometimes we talk about dreams. Sometimes we talk about childhood. And of the benefits, I'm a big sports fan. But the easiest way I can explain it is, if you are an athlete, you spend time watching film. You replay the events and scenarios so that when you go play again and you catch yourself in those moments, you can reflect on the work that you did to recognize, okay, in this scenario, this is the right play. And in doing therapy, I'm able to study the game film of my emotional impulses. When my sense of abandonment is triggered, this is how I respond. When people start getting close to me, when I feel threatened, this is the typical ways that my subconscious will act out. Then, as I would find myself going throughout the motions of daily life, and I catch myself in those familiar positions, I'm much more acutely aware that I'm in one of those scenarios and where this typically heads for me. So it was a really important intervention for me as far as rethinking my behavior, and watching when I am low, when I am manic. I find myself back in these toxic relationships that are no good for me. I find myself leaning on coping mechanisms that often might provide short-term benefits, but there will be this big crash a couple of days later. Therapy just really helped me by holding a big mirror up. And I think the first day I thought that he was going to have this brilliant insight and I would have this Goodwill Hunting kind of cathartic moment. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, that's not really how real life works. It's a lot less glamorous. Some days I would go in and leave wondering, like, what was that? What did I even pay that guy for? What was this? But, sure enough, it really helped me navigate a very turbulent time in my life, especially, taking therapy sessions on the phone, pacing around a Walmart parking lot when you're on a day off in the middle of a 2-month tour. It really helped me kind of hold on to something and have accountability as it relates to my behavior.
Well, you spoke about, you said word intervention, and you also talked about, the depths that kind of brought you into therapy. Can you describe like an incident or an event that you could think of that really, was a low point in your life that really said, I need to get some help?
While I'm sure I could think of a couple, I probably don't even remember most of them at this point because I probably was only even there a lot of the times, whether it was, like getting blackout drunk and doing something dumb, waking up and having to kind of retrace in this embarrassing way, apologize to people that you had acted out with. For me, it was really more of just this steady progression, this feeling of kind of being up to your neck and feeling overwhelmed, moving out to Los Angeles, not having immediate family here, not having those anchor points with which somebody can kind of shake you up and going, you're going through something right now. My decision to go to therapy was because I didn't want to find myself in those moments. Like I didn't want to wake up or not wake up because I acted out in this impulsive way. So I didn't have one of those moments. And I hope that people don't wait until they have to have one of those intervention points. For me, it was just recognizing, it just felt like there was, the highs and lows didn't have to be quite so polarizing. You can be the one with your hands on the steering wheel. Sometimes I would feel like I was on autopilot acting out because I was unable to recognize where and how my impulses in the present moment could be explained through retracing my behavior in the past. So it was as easy as, the decision to get a personal trainer or something. It doesn't always need to be stepping on the scale and having the number. You just want to be better. And that was what it was for me personally.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of self-awareness and also a lot of experience, trying things and maybe having it work out in an unexpected way and really looking for guidance. As you were talking, it reminded me of your song Riptide, which you did with Mike Shinoda. And it touches on battling bad habits and references to drug addiction. And we talked a little bit about pot, and now that cannabis is legal in a lot of states, what were the pros and the cons for you with using pot?
Yeah, oh my gosh, this is something that I'm really passionate about because I've been getting high my whole life practically, and I've had a lot of friends who have gone through really, really hard times where pot was a part of that, and it didn't help. Particularly, I would say some of my low points included when I was about 17, 18 years old. I was dealing with pretty bad acne, and I was prescribed Accutane or one of these, antibacterial.
Antibiotics. Right.
Yeah, and I don't think it was kind of gloss. I was probably only half paying attention. I was just ready to get these pimples off my face so I could get laid. And I really wasn't paying attention when they were telling you not to drink, not to smoke pot. And at the time, this was a story that was true for a lot of kids my age, where it contributed to these feelings of manic, depression. And I had one of my closest friends when I was around 16, 17 years old, started smoking a lot of weed and would start behaving increasingly erratically. I remember one time I was studying for an exam when I was in college in Montreal, and I got a call from the police saying he had gone missing. They couldn't find him. They found him trying to hitchhike, and he couldn't explain what he was doing there. And you see these commercials now. It's so much more widely accepted. And for me, pot stimulates my curiosity. It enables me to sit with a guitar, sit with production software. I can sit for hours in ways that otherwise my attention wanders, or I can get more down on myself. It really opens up a certain curiosity for me creatively that I really enjoy. And I can get giggly and all the good things that come with it. But for me, it was very, very hard to find any sort of moderation with it. It was kind of like either I was taking a really hardline stance of sobriety, and then I would miss it. I would have a really good time getting high, and then I wake up and I've got an itch to get high. I'm just trying to make it until the sun goes down so I can rationalize it, but then I'm finding new excuses, and all of a sudden I'm getting high a couple times a day. And those things aren't inherently bad for me, but it's the accumulation. For me, it would take about 4 or 5 days of being stoned, and I would just wake up and just feel lousy, like grumpy and down on myself and irritated, because when you're getting high, whether it's smoking pot or something that's a little heavier, you're trading tomorrow. You're trading tomorrow for that present moment. You're tapping into resources in your brain, whether it's dopamine or serotonin. You're taking them at the expense of how they would normally be distributed, and you just wake up just feeling miserable. And my relationship to MDMA is very similar. My relationship to psychedelics, like those things are positives in my life. I would not be honest to sit here and tell you that those were bad things. They really helped turn my life around and open up all kinds of new neural pathways. Doing acid when I was a kid, it was just, I can't even describe. I left it a different person than I was going into it. I don't think that that's a bad thing, but man, those next days are low. They're really tough, and took me a long time to finally recognize, I don't know if it's always worth dealing with that come down. And that was what led me to taking breaks from these things. And now I try and feel it out, but again, with a little more accountability, a little more self-awareness. And when I catch myself doing those justifications in my head, looking for an excuse, that's when I know that I'm probably better off putting it down. The last thing I'll say as it relates to pot, I found CBD to be a really effective tool for me, where I was still able to scratch that itch, but without the psychoactive properties, without the impulsivity, without quite as much as a hangover the next day. So to anybody that is trying to find like some alternative, because there really isn't a good one, I did find smoking CBD, like, it helped at least. But yeah, that's been as early as like 12 years old.
Yeah, I mean, CBD, of course, has like a calming effect, and pot could have the same thing. And CBD can also be used for pain. I'm glad you talked about it because, a lot of musicians, not only are you in an industry where it can be everywhere and sometimes more accepted than, let's say, going to a therapist or, taking medication. Has that ever been something that you've tried? I mean, as far as a prescription medication?
I mean, recreationally once or twice, but never something that was prescribed to combat these negative emotions. But I have people in my life that have taken anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants, and it has been really productive. It has worked really well for certain people. For other people, it doesn't. The big thing, I think, is just not losing your imagination and your ability to dream of a better version of yourself. I think that none of these things are going to work. Don't inherently believe that they will, or if you don't believe that you're worthy of another version of yourself. For me, taking care of myself was as simple as recognizing that there just has to be a better, more calm equilibrium for me to meet. And until I was ready for that, then there was nothing that then I was just going through the motions of self-help. Then I was just going through the motions of taking care of myself. So I think you have to really, when looking at familiar habits or relationships that aren't productive, if you're not willing to audit and re-examine these different factors that are contributing and isolate some variables in your life, then you're just not ready to get better yet. And that's okay. Don't rush. It's a lifelong journey, but being honest with that is going to save yourself and the people around you just so much grief. Yeah.
I mean, it takes not only self-awareness, but also a lot of experience to kind of figure out what works for you. And, one of the, I guess, things that I say with the podcast is, be brave, ask for help, and be persistent in finding the mental help that you need. Persistence really is more like finding what works for you, because there are solutions out there, but it's just trying to figure out like what is going to work for your lifestyle, what is going to work for your personality and your brain chemistry and all of that good stuff.
It's gonna suck sometimes, I think we do our best to kind of paint it as, it is a beautiful step in your life. I think when you do decide to be the one making these choices and find a community, find a routine that helps, some days it is way less fun than treating your body like shit. It is. I understand that. I'm not going to be here with any righteousness or anything. And I know that that's not the point here. But for anybody who feels like excluded because it is challenging, it gets no easier, I remember I was watching some bodybuilder or somebody was talking on YouTube, and they were saying that the weights don't get any lighter. Like a 20-pound weight is still heavy, still 20 pounds for everybody, but ideally you have those days where you're like, wow, like I'm on top of my shit right now. Like I would have acted out there and I'm not going to. Oh, good. Like I had a really creative, productive day and I didn't get high. I guess I don't need to be high. This narrative I've told myself that I can't write unless, or that I won't find love unless I'm in this relationship that comes with all this other shit, this baggage and these fights. Like, wow, you have to give it a chance to do work its magic. But then ideally those moments outweigh the excruciating nature of long-term self-help. A lot of time it sucks. So
well, what I find really interesting as I listen to you is that when you talk about a lot of, I guess, almost a struggle within yourself, sometimes between hope and hopelessness and, good and bad habits. And I find that also in your music. And you have this thing with the X that is sort of represents to me that maybe the bad side. And, you who kind of represents you trying to be a better person. And you have this song, In Over My Head, which I love. And I love the beats to it and everything. And it's about kind of like the pessimism of life when it overwhelms you. So when you look, I guess, in your past, I mean, how do you hang on to hope when things seem so hopeless?
Oh my gosh. Isn't that the question of 2020 and going into 2021? And I think for me, I can get very scared by my own nihilistic thoughts. It's kind of, I just hit these moments of, if you don't got hope, what do you got? You know, you're not wrong to be discouraged or to be cynical, but for me, sometimes the best thing I can do is stop looking to change the world and start looking to change someone's world. You know, just in my agency to not carry the burden of life to the front door of every relationship that I'm in, thinking critically about when and how I use social media. Am I using it to bring people up, or am I going to be triggering their anxieties? Those sorts of things really help give me a sense of purpose. And, you know, I think we as musicians, I'm sure you could speak more to this, but one thing that I navigated in therapy is I really do believe in the powers of manifestation. I'm not a spiritual person. I believe manifesting is less about some spirit, you know, waving a wand. It's more about the social interactions. People don't want to get in the way of somebody who is really driven and on their way to doing great things. Typically, in deciding and in being really persistent, a lot of people want to help somebody out like that. And I think that plays into my manifestation. There have been times where I was in college, selling pot, stoned all day, dropping out of school, and I really decided I was going to build this life. I'm going to move to Los Angeles. I'm going to write some songs, this and that. And now I'm sitting there with my gold record on my wall and feeling all good about myself. And sometimes that manifestation hits these brick walls where sometimes you're not the one in control, you know, and this pandemic is a really, really good example of that. I can't manifest my way out of this one because it's not about what I can control. Sometimes that sense of hopelessness or feeling overwhelmed is just a matter of having to accept that the world doesn't revolve around us and our actions and our impulses. That's a really hard thing to reconcile with this personality type. It's been such an effective motivating tool for me. It fuels my ambition. It gives me a reason to wake up every day and get after it and be grateful. And, you know, all those words around productivity, those are the things that keep me moving throughout the day. I wake up today, I've got this podcast interview. How can I be the best guest I can be? How can I be the most thoughtful with these answers? When I have to confront the loss of a loved one, when you have to confront a pandemic, senselessness, it's really hard. And it's supposed to be. Like, we don't have all the answers. So for me, it is just trying to focus on what I can control, accept that which I can't. And if I do that, then I can help make it a little bit easier for somebody else. And in doing that, I have changed the world. I have contributed to an overall better planet. I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. I want to take my little sliver of the world with my relationships, my neighborhood. What can I do within this thing to be proud of myself and to feel like I was here for something positive and get back to my mental health toolkit? And then you wake up the next day and you just feel a bit better.
What are if you could just name those things in your mental health toolkit? I'm really curious. I mean, you've already talked about some things. You talked about counseling. You've talked about, you know, therapy and pot and so forth. But
so for me, it's like writing is a big one. Obviously, as a songwriter, it can't be that much of a surprise for people. But making things, you know, creating something. I woke up that day without anything. I sat with my guitar, and wow, just like that, that feels like the opposite of dying to me. Creating something, making something. I really feel better when I'm doing that. That's what I'm here to do. I also find working out and physical exercise is a good manifestation of that sense of agency. Taking care of your body, working against what comes with a sedentary lifestyle. If I sit around eating like junk food all fucking day, I'm not going to feel very good. So when's the last time I got like a good visceral sweat in when I couldn't even talk because I was so out of breath? Those moments when I'm gasping for air, I'm bringing life back in. Those things, I'm just tricking my brain chemistry into start and feeling good. Finding nature, in California, that's easier than some other places, but going for hikes, going camping, those sorts of things really help me. Spending time away from my phone is really hard and only getting harder, but
it's like an addiction.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And then I go through, what if somebody needs me and I'm not there? What if they call and I don't pick up? And sometimes it's just, that might just be the case. You'll figure it out. You're not going to throw it away. You're going to be back in 30 minutes. But even just putting my phone away and being unreachable for a second, there is this like, I forgot that this little part of myself was checking 80 times a day, if I got that notification. Those things all help. And sometimes with my therapist, we have like regular scheduled calls, whether it's every week or every 2 weeks. I'm in a period right now where we're just catching up if and when I feel that urge, that need after 2 years of working together. We feel a bit more comfortable having that space. But typically that is a part of it. Asking myself, when's the last time I had these conversations with people that I know make me feel better, whether it's a therapist or a family member or a best friend. And again, like I can come on here like I have it all figured out. Just maybe 2 days ago, I felt like garbage. Like I just, all of that, a lifetime of work amounted to me waking up and still being super irritable, completely not in the mood to do anything. What's the point of doing any of this? When is this pandemic going to be over? All of that. And just having these kinds of conversations, I feel better already.
Well, I'm glad you feel better. And one thing I noticed with you is that you do give yourself credit where credit is due, even for the little things. And I find that, when we take a moment and we stop and say, you know what, I made that person feel better today, or I created this song and I think it's really going to be something positive for people when they listen to it. Those are the little things that really keep us going. And, sometimes we don't have people around us, especially now, to tell us that. And so sometimes it's good to tell ourselves and recognize, all the good that we've been doing, even amidst all of the mess, that happens with our lives.
Well, we have no problem beating ourselves up for the little failures, but for some reason, the little wins along the way, feels so like uncomfortable sometimes to give yourself that credit, to big yourself up. Person listening to this right now, like sometimes when me and my girlfriend wake up and before we've checked our phones or anything, we do 3 things that we're grateful for that day. Whether it's, like I'm going to call my mom today and I'm just so grateful that she'll pick up when I call and that she's there for me. Or like when you cooked me that dinner last night, that was so good. I appreciate that. Just give yourself the fucking little wins because that's life. Like this is it. It is the accumulation of these little moments that we were so busy waiting for the next thing for that we weren't even present for. Like this is the product of your life. And if you spend those little in-between times on autopilot, anxious or upset, then that will be what your life amounted to. And so I don't want to do that. I want to win. I want to feel good right here, right now. And I want to trust that won't come at the expense of that later thing. Like you'll figure it out down the road. You don't need to spend your time in the present so anxious about what's coming. You're allowed to you can give yourself permission at any point. And now is as good a point as any other point in your life to give yourself that permission. Pause this video right now. We're not going anywhere. Just pause it and just give yourself a little pat on the back and like reflect on if you're still here, you made it this far. We'll wait. We're going to give you 3 seconds. Okay, we're back. That felt good, right? Yeah, exactly.
It did. And, I have to mention this because I know one of the ways that we can improve our mental wellness is to use our care for the world and for each other to take action. And you just described some things that we could do on a daily basis, small things that make a big difference in our world. But you also have a charity, it's called XX Resistance Fund.
That's right.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Using things like memorabilia from music videos or from live shows I've done, auctioning off and raffling off meet and greet opportunities, one-on-one interactions with fans. You raise money for different charities that are impacting things that different fans are going through. So recent examples of our work, we raffled off a bunch of stuff from the music video for my last video, Dirty. We gave away some of the masks that were worn in the video, as well as a one-on-one FaceTime opportunity, and we raised over $1,000 for the Ally Coalition, which is an LGBTQ charity. And yeah, just little things like that along the way. We've worked with Music Cares in the past, the Sunrise Movement for climate justice, Campaign Zero to end police brutality. Just little things like that, where not only are we raising funds and awareness for these issues, but for me, the real power of it is showing people that getting involved in the issues that matter to them is as simple as showing up. It's like your mental health. It is as simple as making the decision that you're going to get off the sidelines and get involved. So many of the times that I talk to representatives from these charities, from these organizations, they're from all different walks of life. They might have a regular 9 to 5 and be doing this on their free time. They might be volunteering in college. Half the time they're like younger than me. And I always just, again, I thought that activism, I thought that caring about what you believe in was somehow reserved for the people that figured everything out. And then there was the rest of us. But really, it's just as simple as getting involved and doing a little bit of research. No matter where you're living, there are people that believe in the things that you believe in. And doing these little neighborhood walks, local cleanups, like little things like that, they make you feel better and you feel a part of something bigger than yourself. And here in COVID times, that's just so important. So that's a little bit of the work that I do outside of my music. And yeah, it's very rewarding. And if anybody wants to know more, then you can reach out to me at Grandson and we can talk about it.
Oh, that's so awesome. Your music is so in line with your personality and what you're doing. Even, the thoughts in your head, I could tell they spill out into your music. So thank you so much for that. I cannot wait until seeing you live, because I've seen some of the shows when you were previewing Death of an Optimist, and it was just electric. So,
oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. Yeah. And thank you for doing this. And to anybody listening that's going through a hard thing, check your head. Check your head. You're doing just fine. We're all going to make it through this time. And hopefully this year brings a lot of good stuff and a lot of optimism into your life.
Next, I'll be talking with singer-songwriter Kat Jensen as we tackle topics like the uses and benefits of CBD oil for mood disorders and what to do when we feel overwhelmed or in over our heads with life. Well, we have the talented singer-songwriter Kat Jensen with us on the Check Your Head podcast today, and we are going to talk about the Grandson interview. He has a song, it's called In Over My Head, which is kind of the feeling you get when you're kind of overwhelmed with life. I mean, what do you do when things like school and things like, work and everything starts to collide together and you feel overwhelmed?
Well, it's an interesting thing because sometimes I have to go back and just simplify. I have to really get real with myself and try to simplify things. I really appreciated it when Grandson, he spoke about putting together your toolkit. And I've been doing that myself, is putting together a toolkit. And that can entail, personally, these things that can help you. Like he spoke about journaling. Well, I journal every day. And I don't worry about my writing. I don't worry about my spelling. I just write whatever the hell comes to my head, and you put it there. Some days it's going to be very long. Some days it's going to be just a little blurb, but it's a place to put things. And I find that helpful to me. I also have used Headspace. I've used Calm. I've done meditation. These are things that are all, in my toolbox. A big one for me is gratitude, is I try to go through a little list of gratitude because it keeps me in the moment. It keeps me realizing that I'm okay right now. But otherwise, my head can keep spinning, trying to figure things out. And what I need to do, you can't figure things out when it's just spinning around and around and around.
Yeah, I think that's a good time to step away. Like I find that when I'm getting so riled up with so many things to get done, once I step away, I take my dog for a walk, everything relaxes, my mind gets clear, and all of a sudden I start to see the priorities. So, prioritizing what's important and then also letting other things fall away or maybe rescheduling them for another time. These are all ways to kind of break down that feeling of being overwhelmed with too many things. And I think another thing too is that sometimes we take on too much responsibility and we don't allow ourselves to say no, and that's okay to say no, reschedule it to the next week, do something like that for our mental health and wellness. And also delegate. That's the other thing that I need to think more about is that I tend to be the one that's wanting to do it all. But there are a lot of people, if you ask for help, they will help you. And people have the time and the care to do that. So if you're able to delegate any of your tasks,
Right.
There was one question that I asked grandson, and it was, how do you have hope when you feel hopeless? Which kind of brings me to the topic of catastrophizing.
Yeah.
And it's a term that's used and that can happen, if something bad happens. For instance, instead of kind of being rational about it, we can kind of spiral down and it becomes a catastrophe. Let's talk a little bit about that because that could happen and that can really lead to, some bad behavior or really bad thoughts when we really need to put a stop to it.
Well, catastrophizing is interesting because it's sort of an all or nothing type of thinking in a sense. It's, where something gets really huge. And, people might kind of dismiss that as just being over exaggeration or, well, you're just kind of going off the deep end on something. But our minds do these things.
Right. Catastrophizing is like going from something that happened that was bad, but getting to the point where it's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And, I have a good example of this. I had a friend who was like the leader of a support group here, and he was doing this for years. And he had this meeting room that was donated to him. It was sort of like a little bit dark and dingy, and it had free parking, but it was kind of not in the greatest part of town. But one day, one of the support group members got upset about something, started complaining about the group, started complaining to the building manager. And what happened was my friend ended up losing this office space, to conduct his meetings. But he went to a hotel room by himself and he started catastrophizing. He's like, this is what I've been doing for years. This is all I do. This is my purpose in life. What am I going to do now? I'm letting down my group. And that's the whole spiraling down, right? Of making it a catastrophe. And luckily, when we talked, it's all about talking yourself down or maybe even calling a friend or buddy to help talk you
off the ledge, so to speak.
Talk you off. Exactly. Talk you off the ledge.
That's in your toolkit. You're going to call somebody when you start knowing your brain is doing this to you.
Right. Or if you can't reach someone, you're going to have to talk yourself off the ledge. And that is difficult because you have to get to that little part of your brain that rationally knows that your life is not going to fall apart.
Self-talk can do a lot for you and a lot against you. And that's where it's important to recognize how you speak to yourself and to start trying to, when you get those negative thoughts that, oh, this is going to happen, you're going to have to counteract that with saying, wait a minute, how much truth are you telling me and how much are you kind of, fibbing to me here?
Exactly.
Yeah, and challenge your thoughts. That's kind of the basis of a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, is basically learning how to turn your thoughts around. And it does start with you, because you may not be able to call somebody at that moment, but you can look and examine your thought process, and you can tell yourself, "Wait a minute, we're not buying that story, right?"
Exactly. Yeah. But it takes practice. It takes practice, right? To really stop yourself and tell yourself a different story. But the thing that happened with my friend, thankfully, is that when he told the support group what happened, another person from the group stood up and said, "You know what? We have a building here in town that we will donate to you." And what happened is, sometimes one door closes and another door opens, and we do hear that every so often. But in this case, that's exactly what happened. He got a beautiful meeting room at a better part of town, this clean, bright, professional room. And he was so much happier with that. So sometimes when something bad or it seems a little tragic that happens, just give it some time. Sometimes, time is what you need, and it might just be a few days to see what will become of it.
Well, part of catastrophizing too is that impulsive nature, and we want to just figure it out and do something right this second. And that isn't always the answer, like you just pointed out, that we have to learn to manage some of these impulses and how we talk to ourselves. The course of how this unfolds may not be what your mind is telling you. And, because we fortune tell, we try to think we know what's going to be in the future, and we just don't.
One last thing I want to talk about is that grandson sort of explained his relationship with pot and CBD oil. And cannabis has become legal in many states, but I wanted to focus on CBD oil because that has some proven positive mental effects. And CBD oil also is a cannabis without the THC, which is the part that, can make us high, but only has like the medicinal qualities of cannabis. So have you had experience with that, or,
Yeah.
How has that helped you?
Well, I've had some experience with it. I also have a pain issue. I have fibromyalgia and lupus. And, I've used CBD from time to time, but I've used the type that you massage into your muscles, and that's very helpful. But now I just wanted to point out real quickly, not all are created equal, because I do know that they've done studies where they have checked the levels of CBD in different types of products, and there was really not what was touted on the label. The problem with this whole thing is it's really the Wild West out there, because there is no FDA type of scheduling for this as far as products. But there have been a lot of studies and thoughts that say that it's able to help manage anxiety. They think that it actually can possibly help the brain receptors respond to serotonin, which is a very important mental health neurotransmitter in your brain. They're finding so many wonderful things about this.
And one thing I do need to say is that before you start anything like this, you do want to talk with your doctor, because everybody is different as far as how they respond to medication. There are things that you need to know about it before you try it. Like you said, CBD could come in a cream, good for pain and muscles and joints. It could come in a tincture, where you can, use drops underneath your tongue, which gives, better absorption. But I think in general, when you think about CBD, you think about it as having a calming effect. So it
Mm-hmm.
can have a calming effect on anxiety. It could have, have a calming effect on depression. It can, like for me, I've used the cream for my psoriasis, and psoriasis, oh my gosh, I've been battling that all my life. And it is the thing that calms it down better than some of the prescription creams that I've had. And,
Right.
I've had inflammations of psoriasis, and that causes inflammation throughout my body.
They're actually doing studies on it now for inflammation in the brain that, is exasperating symptoms for people with MS or with, other cognitive issues, Alzheimer's and et cetera, because it does have the ability to calm and bring down inflammation. So this is a wonder drug that needs so much more research. We just really need to get on board with getting this research to the point to where we can actually help people.
Right, right. And we know how to use it and where it could be used. Another way that I've used it is kind of in a gummy form, like an edible for sleep. Sometimes I really have a problem with sleep, and it tends to relax my mind when it starts to wind up. So,
Yeah.
these are things that have, helped me personally, and it really
Yeah.
has great emotional and physical benefits.
And just realize that CBD is much different than the THC. THC commonly can really wind people's minds up, and it can actually exacerbate maybe other symptoms of mental illness. I think that that's something that Grandson was talking about, was that he would go back to pot, but sometimes it would make his mind kind of screwed other ways,
Right.
so.
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to say about cannabis is that it can also help with addiction recovery. They've done studies and they found that, especially with opioids, it could help, it kind of modifies the circuits in the brain so that you don't have as much of the craving. And I have, and again, you want to, make sure that you talk to a doctor about this. But I did have a friend who, was on opioids and used cannabis to withdraw from that. And it was successful for him. But, it is something that would be such a wonderful thing because, the opioid crisis really is still alive and thriving. And, whatever kind of solutions we can find.
Exactly. There is a drug out there called, I think it's Stativix or something like that, and it's kind of a combination of drug therapy, but it also includes CBD in the drug, and it's helped people with MS. And so work with your doctors or your therapists and really explore where CBD might be a really useful tool for you, is fantastic. It's another tool in your toolbox.
Right, right. And your addiction specialist. They would also have some information for you. Kat, thank you so much for being on the Check Your Head podcast. I always love talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
A big thank you to Grandson, our featured musical guest, and to singer-songwriter Kat Jensen. For more information on Grandson, visit grandsonmusic.com, and on social media, find him at Grandson and at Grandson Music, and watch him live on YouTube every Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time for his series XX Live, where Grandson talks about music, politics, answers questions from his grandkids, and plays an acoustic track. And be sure to stay tuned to hear a clip of Grandson's In Over My Head. So until next time, be brave, ask for help, and be persistent in finding the mental help that you need.
At 15, I would look around, and all my friends had it figured out. They all thought it, but they never said out loud. I was in over my head. Oh, I feel this vertigo, sick of being an optimist. I'm trying, but I'm in over my head. I'm in over my head. Over my
Check Your Head podcast is kindly supported by DBSA San Gabriel Valley, Lemon Tree Studios, and Blue Oak Mastering and Podcasting in Los Angeles. Visit our website at checkyourheadpodcast.com, where you'll find free and affordable resources for mental health, and where you can also support us by donating or subscribing to our Patreon page. Thank you so much for liking and following us on Facebook and Instagram at Check Your Head Podcast. And the Check Your Head Podcast is sponsored by a 501c3 nonprofit, so all donations are tax deductible. Thank you so much for listening and for your support.